Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to What's the Distance Education. This is NBV3E. Last week, we finished up on by looking at justice. We looked at factors that contribute to the struggles for Aboriginal people in the justice system. We identified ways to help counteract bias against Aboriginal people in the justice system. And finally, we compared Aboriginal views of justice and Western ideas of justice, and we're going to explore that third point in more detail today. But going back to our short little review here, um, we looked at examples of historical wrongs, um, and looked at several different cases of um, uh, examples of discrimination in the Canadian justice system through systemic discrimination and racial profiling. There was several policing issues that we covered. That of Helen Betty Osborne, J.J. Harper, and then Neil Stonechild, and Dudley George. We looked in depth at what happened at Ipperwash, and and then yeah. So sorry, I slipped up there. But today, as I said, we're going to continue on at looking at um, indigenous ways of um, dealing with social punishment, and with that, we'll dig into something called restorative justice. Um, so, first of all, though, I uh, wanted to flip back here to the textbook, and we'll just make that a bit larger. Right, there we go. And so, obviously, because of the inherent discrimination of the Indian Act, um, things have turned out really bad for the indigenous people in this country. The incarceration rate, or the number of people in jail, is way, way above, in multiples above, the average Canadian citizen that we find, mostly young people, in incarcerated. Um, and uh, other ways of doing things, of dealing with trouble, need to be um, thought of and done to prevent this from happening. So, uh, the Aboriginal Justice Strategy um, is found on page 270. Um, outlines a number of different strategies that people have been working on in the last 10 or 20 years. So, the AGS is a way for Aboriginal communities to have more direct increased involvement in administrating justice for their communities. The goal is to promote alternatives to the mainstream justice system in order to respond effectively to the needs and values of the communities while reducing the rates of victimization, crime, and incarceration of Aboriginal people. Because remember, incarceration doesn't actually solve the problem, right? You're just punishing somebody for making a mistake. And many of these nonviolent crimes um, can don't need to be incarcerated. Like violent crimes, of course, you are protecting everybody from. There are certain people out there who um, uh, continuously um, get involved in violent crimes, and society, both indigenous and non-indigenous people, need to be protected from them. Right. Okay. So those are a very small percentage of the amount of people who are being incarcerated. Most are for minor crimes like, uh, well, um, I'm calling them minor crimes when you compare them to violent crimes like murder and extortion and things like that. Uh, Trying to smuggle drugs into a community, or even selling drugs on the street. Uh, these are, when you look at the big picture, are minor crimes because a lot of times these people, they, the young people who are involved in that, they um, uh, um, are doing it for a very short time, and they get caught, right? And then they get put in jail, and because they don't have a lot of money available, they have to have a government lawyer represent them, and which are really busy, right? There's hardly any of these lawyers available, and so they don't have very much time to spend on the defense of uh, youth, and they end up making some kind of plea and going right to jail. And it's not like if you have all the resources and money to get a good lawyer, then you are able to um, get some kind of plea deals or whatever, and protect yourself. Okay, so the focus now is on prevention and intervention, and that is, if someone gets caught for a minor crime, then there are some programs available to prevent them from continuing on um, making crime a lifestyle. Um, so, one thing that's been happening is policing. A lot more indigenous people are becoming police, and the communities are more in control of the police organizations. We have NAPS up here. Um, so that allows for increased Aboriginal policing, training of policing cultural, historical, and legal issues, efforts to improve police with Aboriginal community relationships. Um, and then if we skim down to um, page 275, there's a section here on the Gladeau courts. Now we'll talk more about that later, but just in summary, Aboriginal Legal Services of Toronto and other legal clinics often exist in what are called Gladeau courts or Aboriginal persons courts. Glue courts and the reports that are written by Aboriginal court workers take into account the life circumstances of an Aboriginal offender and give recommendations to be considered in sentencing. Okay, so Gladeau can help people uh, in the courts that um, if you they bring up the person's history and also recognizing the effects of the um, industrial schools on families and as well as parental if a parent had been involved uh, with alcohol and alcohol the effects of alcohol on the family both emotionally and physically. And so things like this can be brought into the sentencing, and a little bit of leniency can be shown to people who have um, been surrounded by um, uh, problems and marginalization for most of their life. These are the Gladeau courts. The only trouble with these is that um, there is a real backlog in these, right? So um, uh, there's not enough workers, just like there are not enough counselors or um, uh, medical staff for the Indigenous people in Canada. Um, there's not enough of these Gladeau courts. Um, and so people get sentenced and they have to face the full brunt of the law. Um, there's also what I mentioned previously, restorative justice and healing sentence circles. And I'll have a little video that I wanted to show you before the class ends tonight. So restorative approaches and the healing sentencing circles, oh, we didn't read about that earlier on the chapter. One outstanding example of restorative justice and the use of healing sentencing circles is Hollow Water First Nation. Hollow Water First Nation is a Anishinaabe community of about 600 people located east of Lake Winnipeg, 200 kilometers north of Winnipeg. So they've developed this healing circle program. And so what this all boils down to is uh, involving a number of different elements of the perspectives of the community, including the police, the perpetuator, that's not the right word, the person responsible for the crime, the victim of the crime, um, and different community members. And uh, what it is that the person who commits the crime has to plead guilty, and then they all get together and have a discussion on how what this person should do to compensate for um, whatever it was that they participated in to hurt someone else. Um, we also have healing lodges which are popping up. We have one here in Sioux Lookout. Um, and I'll show you the web page of that. Um, okay, and so I'm going now to There we go. Okay, so we'll look at some specific things here. Um, let's see now. Okay. All right, so I do have a few videos, one on the Gladeau principles. Let's take a look at this video. It will give you uh, a visual and visual demonstration of what Gladeau is. Okay, so this is Murray Sinclair who talked. He was one of the um, people who was involved in the um, starting of the Gladeau program.
Jamie Gladeau, a young Anishinaabe woman, was charged with murder of her ex-partner. She was tried before the court, and there was some issues that came up with how her case proceeded and the outcome of it, and it went to the Supreme Court of Canada where the decision of Gladeau was made.
It was 1999. It was in recognition or acknowledgement that Indigenous people were overrepresented in the criminal justice system, in the incarceration in jails and prisons in Canada. The Supreme Court directed other courts that we had to take into consideration the circumstances, the particular circumstances of an Aboriginal offender in sentencing. So Gladeau and a subsequent case called Appealy that clarified and strengthened the Gladeau reasons are used as very important tools by the courts when sentencing Aboriginal offenders, that were to take into consideration all of their personal circumstances and to find options short of incarceration, that incarceration should be a last resort.
And there's the actual law there, all available sanctions other than imprisonment that are reasonable in
It's
this
our responsibility. It's actually a positive duty imposed on judges that when an Aboriginal offender is being sentenced, to delve and look deeply into their backgrounds, their personal circumstances, to help us craft the best sentence. Consider less serious or less harsh sentences for an offender if the circumstances of that person require it. That's not to say no Aboriginal people go to jail or prison anymore, because they do.
I recognize Gladeau as a program not to give someone a lesser sentence, which a lot of people misinterpret. The purpose of the Gladeau is to address those particular traumas.
Gladeau factors are things that affected Indigenous person in their life. It could be historic things like the impact of residential school or the 60 scoop, or the imposition of other Western systems in their life that are meant to assimilate people in their communities. And Gladeau factors doesn't need to be historic. It can be current issues that they're facing, like if they grew up or currently live in poverty or homelessness.
If you read the report, it's pretty easy to connect the dots, and you can see how one thing leads to another, especially when the reports are presented chronologically. I think it becomes very clear, and it becomes even clear to the person who the report is about. Sometimes they're learning things about their family or their community that they didn't even know themselves until this process started.
In some cases, there's kind of like been an awakening with some people where they're more aware. They're more aware of their life, and once they get a chance to really slow down and think about and review their life story, I think that itself is healing. I think that's where the change can happen.
Okay, so restorative justice, and our example here of the Gladeau principle, is all about healing. it's not about incarceration. And so this is something that fits in with traditional indigenous viewpoints and attitudes towards crime and how to deal with and how to obtain justice in the community. Okay, so let me get us out of there if I can figure it out. Okay, close this. Oh, escape. That's what I gotta do. Escape from this. Okay. We already. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. So, this is a video done on APTN by, let's see, yeah, APTN, which says use of the Gladeau principle has largely failed in this report. Okay, so let's listen to
Hayden
this.
King of the Yellowhead Institute is one of the co-authors of the report, which looks specifically at how Gladeau principles have been applied on 6 nations of the Grand River in southern Ontario. He says neither Indigenous perpetrators nor victims of crime are being well served by current Gladeau implementation.
I mean, people were really, hurt by their pass through the criminal justice system and the lack of justice that communities and families are receiving in the system. And I think that's on the one hand, and on the other, it's the fact that we continue to see these incredibly disproportionate rates of incarceration among Indigenous peoples.
The report identifies 4 key findings which are driving the poor results: disorganized Gladeau processes and lack of information, limited resources for rehabilitation, restoration, and Gladeau workers, rise of Indigenous identity fraud in Gladeau applications, and failure to support victims, families, and communities. Paula Hill is the other co-author of the report, who has worked in the Six Nations justice system for over 20 years, including as a Gladeau report writer. She says it is not uncommon for an accused to falsely present themselves as Indigenous in the hopes of getting bail.
The court itself, like the justices of the peace, they struggle to even know what to ask. And so when somebody identifies as Indigenous, the justices of the peace tend to just accept what they say.
Six Nations Police Service Chief Darren Montour adds perpetrators take advantage of Gladeau to get reduced sentences.
Those accused who commit these serious offenses know that they're going to get a reduced sentence based on their Indigenous heritage. And to me, that's taking advantage of the justice system. And they promise this, that, and the other thing in the world, and like a month later, then here we go again. It's a revolving door. They go.
Jonathan Rudin is with Toronto-based Aboriginal Legal Services that has handled a number of Gladeau cases. He says he would like to have seen the report take a broader perspective, looking at how different provinces are applying or failing to apply Gladeau.
In a number of provinces in Canada, you can't get a Gladeau report. So while the report talks about problems with the reports, getting them and certain other issues in provinces where they're available, it doesn't mention that in, for example, Manitoba and Saskatchewan, there are no Gladeau reports at all available. And those 2 provinces are a real driver in the increase in Indigenous people coming into prison.
In the end, Hill says there is only so much the justice system itself can do when it comes to reducing Indigenous incarceration rates, and there's a serious need for improved intervention programming.
We are seeing a higher prevalence of mental health and addictions, and it's more like complex trauma that we're hearing about. The severity of mental health and addiction are literally off the just through the roof.
Okay, so what they're saying here basically is Gladeau it can work, but it needs a stronger support network, right? That they need workers and they need training for the like justice of the peace and things like that to recognize fraud, and also they need programs that they can offer people as a resolution to their sentencing, right? um, and some provinces haven't really jumped into this. They mentioned in the video, for instance, Manitoba and Saskatchewan, where the indigenous population of both those provinces is huge. Uh, what else we got here? Anything more about Gladeau? Okay, we don't have anything more about Gladeau. Okay. All right, so now we will look at. Um, okay, I'm going to unit number 4, Finding Truth. Right, and so actually, in the learning goals here on the first page, it mentions the Ipperwash Inquiry, the impact of the Ipperwash Inquiry on the justice for Aboriginal peoples. Well, there was a huge inquiry on this, and they came up with all kinds of suggestions. Some have been implemented, and some haven't. But they are there to, um, uh, people need to continue on pursuing these um, suggestions from the inquiry. Um, and let's see. So we hopefully that you can be able to explain Gladeau from the videos that we just watched. Um, in the unit on page 3, uh, there's more information here on the Aboriginal Justice Strategy. There have been many recent strategies to improve the justice system in Canada for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples as part of the Federal Department of Justice's Aboriginal Justice Strategy, AJS. Many recommendations have been made over the years, and many communities have been successful in their efforts. Corrections Service of Canada has introduced several programs to address some of the needs of Aboriginal peoples. Some of the community-based programs include pre-sentencing options, community sentencing circles, Aboriginal justices of peace, family and civil mediation. Meditation and additional community services of victims for the reintegration of offenders. On page 5, there's a section here on pursuing justice in policing. Many communities, organizations, commissions, and inquiries have worked toward and recommended improvements to policing. These efforts can lead to policing that is more preventative and holistic rather than reactive. So, this all fits in with, traditional Anishinaabe practices of that the indigenous people have been using for as long as they can remember. Preventative and holistic approach to policing, and also to the involvement of what everyone is going to do about a crime of sorts. After Dudley George's death in 1995, two significant ways in which the justice has pursued was through a police investigation and through the Ipperwash inquiry. Subsequent positive developments in policing for Aboriginal peoples have included increased Aboriginal policing, training of police in culture, historical and legal issues, efforts to improve police Aboriginal community relationships, and planning for effectively addressing conflicts and crises involving Aboriginal people, for example, related to land and treaty rights. So, with the Ipperwash inquiry, let's see now here, they something came up. Um, where was that again? This term called color of light. So when the police entered into the situation there in Ipperwash, they brought in some very armed, heavy tactical squads, very intimidating, right? But there is part of the law which is called the color of right. Interesting. It was something that I was not familiar of. That some of the people who were arrested in the Ipperwash confrontation brought this up as a matter of defense, and so it's mentioned in our unit. So I did a search for it, and let's see on page. Let's close that one so I don't open it again. That was Unit 3. Okay, all right. So in support question number 1, you're asked to read the Ipperwash inquiry on the following page. So we're on page 5. It's from the textbook. All right, so you read this, and these are some of the outcomes and some of the results of the riot at Ipperwash and the death of Dudley George. On the bottom of page 6, it says many Ipperwash occupiers were arrested on charges of forcible entry to the provincial park. However, the charges were later withdrawn. The occupiers had the reasonable defense of color of right. And you're asked to investigate what is meant by the legal principle of color of right. Okay, so this was something new to me as well. It's not a familiar principle that you hear about every day. So I do have a video that explains that. Where are you? Okay. Where'd you disappear to? Oh, here we go. Okay, so let's just listen to this and see how it would apply to the events at Ipperwash.
Number 22, which is error of law and color of right. Error of law and color of right. Okay, let's break these two down. Firstly, error of law in the realm of criminal law is a fundamental principle that ignorance of law is no excuse. This means that if you commit a crime, you cannot defend yourself by simply saying you did not know it was illegal. The principle is enshrined in Section 19 of the Criminal Code of Canada, which states that an error of law is generally not a defense in criminal cases. However, as with many legal principles, there are exceptions to this too. One such exception is the color of right defense. This defense acknowledges that there are situations where an individual genuinely believes that they have a legal right to act in a certain way, even if that belief is mistaken. In such cases, the mistaken belief about the law can be considered when determining whether the individual is at fault. To give you a clearer picture, imagine someone taking a bicycle they genuinely believed was theirs, but in reality it wasn't.
Okay, so as far as the people who were involved in the demonstration, they really believed that this land, or Ipperwash, was actually their First Nations land. And because it had been taken illegally and it had been agreed upon that this would be returned, right? So the army had taken the land. And I mean, all the proof was out there. And so they believed that they had the right to be exactly where they were. And um, and and so the response of the police at that time was what caused the problem, and a number of other issues that kind of snowballed and just kept making things worse. Of course, there was um, you know, aggressive people on both sides, right? That they didn't communicate well enough to diffuse the situation. And it became a military standoff. Okay, so that is exactly what color of right is. Is that in some cases, if people believe that um, the law was a mistake, or that breaking the law was a mistake, they weren't actually breaking the law, they were entitled to be there, then they could use that as a defense. Anyways, just wanted to point that out to help you with um, understanding what they meant about the legal principle of color of right on page 6. Um, so, um, what has popped up in the last couple of years is um, some types of restorative justice, including healing circles um, and healing lodges, as well as compensation. We'll take a look at healing lodges here, and as I mentioned earlier, there is a healing lodge right here in Sioux Lookout. Um, Bayadaaban, excuse me if I'm not pronouncing, Bayadaaban Healing Lodge. Um, and this is the website for it right here. So they used to bring in younger people, groups of younger people, and uh, teach them um, traditional art and crafts and other teachings, traditional teachings. Um, and now I think I've heard that it's becoming a healing lodge for a whole family. So you can picture that if youth gets into trouble and they can, rather than go into jail, they can um, visit one of these healing lodges. Maybe their family can join there with them to help them work things out. So um, generally, people who work these things out can um, find some type of healing that they won't reoffend. And really, that's what they want people to do, is not reoffend. If you go to jail, you'll probably reoffend, right? And there is a short little video on um, well, this particular one is on sentencing uh, circle used for the first time at Edmonton courts. Okay, so this is another uh, different program that works quite well. Let's watch this video. I want to make sure we have enough time to finish up today.
Begin.
Whether you've been to court or not, you can probably still picture it. That wooden paneled courtroom with a judge sitting up high, looking down and delivering a sentence. But for the first time, this courthouse was host to an Indigenous proceeding, and it's the subject of a new documentary.
It's so powerful that they're owning it.
And so if we can help heal the victim and heal the offender, then all of a sudden we can work towards a solution.
It's called a sentencing circle, where an Indigenous offender who has pled guilty joins their victim, a judge, lawyers, police officers, and community members impacted, all sitting at the same level discussing the crime and how to address it. I spoke with circle keepers Ramona Cardinal and Stacey Harrison from Saddle Lake.
It's like, how do we address the issue? The First Nations people only make up 8% of the population in Canada, and yet we have an 85% population when it comes to crime and courts and in the jail system. So what's wrong with this picture?
Not shunning shame on them or being punitive. We are simply trying to get to the truth, to help them to process it and grow from it so that they don't reoffend.
Although this was the first case in the Edmonton courthouse, across the province, they've dealt with cases ranging from domestic abuse, assault, and theft, coming up with a sentence that reconnects the offender with traditional medicine wheel teachings, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually.
We get creative with some of our recommendations, like, yeah, go and cut wood for an elder, go shovel their sidewalks and stuff like that, just so they have some ownership.
Circle sentencing is an example of restorative justice, which by definition sounds simple enough. That's trying to rehabilitate an offender through reconciliation with the victims and the community. But the team at Saddle Lake says the process is anything but easy on the person pleading guilty.
People think we take it easy. No, they don't get it off easy. You want it easy? Go deal with the court. It's a lot easier because it's fast, it's quick, it's a meat grinder, it's in and out, bang, done. This is a very personal, intimate process, and you have to deal with stuff at a very intimate level and own your truth, speak your truth, and be your truth.
In 5 years, the Saddle Lake team is approaching 600 sentencing circles. And the results, only 5% of those charged have been back in the courts for another crime. To compare, in all courts across Canada, it's estimated a little over a quarter of those charged will reoffend. In the last year, more judges and prosecutors reaching out. And this is just one restorative justice team working in Alberta.
Or we get the word out about this, that more people will get healing. And that's what we're all about. We're all about healing. We're all about getting people back into balance.
That documentary was produced by Edmonton Police and is available on their YouTube page. From the Edmonton Courthouse, Carly Robinson, City News.
Okay.
The new Bearskin Hoodie 4.0 claims to be the most advanced.
So you can see that, and this was 2 years ago that this video was made, and it'd be interesting to see something more recent, but that's not too long ago, that the comparison between and Indigenous people going through the regular court systems were probably 20% reoffend, and where only 5% of the people who go through the restorative justice of a healing circle tend to reoffend. And those are statistics. Those are something that can be measured, and they're evidence-based that those healing circles work very well, and should be thought of as an alternative to the regular court system, because I mean, it's obvious that if 15% less people are oh, excuse my math, it would be 300% less, right? 5 compared to 20, or is that 400% less people thrown into the jail system? And once you get thrown in the jail system, then it's not restorative at all. It tends to introduce people to hardened criminals, and this is where they start their life of crime. And to do it within the community, it's uh, much more of a healing spot, and that's why it has those success rates. Okay. Anyways, so with that, we have the key question um, on page 16. Page 10. Um, so you're asked to read this article, Finding Truth Below, or on page 280 of your textbook, and answer the following questions. In what ways is context a part of the truth? In what ways are fairness and balance part of the truth? To what extent can anyone think that they have arrived at the truth if they have not heard all sides of the story? Is community healing also part of the truth? And if so, who is responsible for it? All right, so read this article either here or in on page 280 of your textbook, and think about those questions and answer them in proper paragraph form. And we'll discuss this further um, in tomorrow's class. Okay, if you have any questions at all about what we covered today, I know it's kind of choppy at times, but um, hopefully it is, once it is all laid out, it has clarity to it. Um, so, thanks for listening in, and I hope you enjoyed the class today, and we'll be back on air again tomorrow. Bye for now.